So hello and welcome everybody to today's Q&A. I'm Nikki Scott from UK Hypopressives, and I'm joined today by Tessa Venuti Sanderson, who is an author, a yoga teacher and a menstrual mentor. So I'm going to let Tessa give you a little bit of background about herself, and then we're going to go on with the subject, which is the rise and fall of the pelvic floor. Very interesting today. So welcome, Tessa. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking to me about this. So I started with yoga. I've been teaching yoga for about 17 years and specialize particularly around women's health. So I teach pregnancy yoga, mother and baby yoga, well women. And I got interested in hypopressives for my postnatal clients particularly, but also I run a women's circle and noticed that as women went towards the menopause, that then they sometimes also needed the hypopressives too. So it was to help both of those types of people. But yes, I menstrual mentor or menstrual educator, and my insurance had to make a special new category for me. Menstrual educator. And it was really, I became interested in menstrual cycle awareness after having my second child. I was fortunate to have straightforward pregnancies and births, and was wanting to learn more about my body when it wasn't pregnant. And as I got interested in cycle awareness, started my women's circle and started just hearing lots of different experiences about the cycle, realizing how different people can feel at different parts of the cycle, different problems that they might have around, maybe PMT or periods. And what women said again and again was, why didn't I know about this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? So I started bringing it to girls, and I run puberty workshops and celebration days for girls. But Nikki, I wonder if you, because I know I'm going to be sharing this with people who follow me, who might not know much about hypopressives. So I wonder whether you can kind of do a brief introduction.
Yeah. Well, I found hypopressives when kind of I felt like everything else had failed me. I mean, that's the real crux of it, is that I had twins, and there wasn't really a lot of information out there about pelvic floor problems. I suffered with incontinence, stress and urge incontinence, and also lots of instability issues. So diastases, which was then causing me quite a bad back. And what I found with kind of general medicine was that the concern was for the baby and not the mother. And there wasn't really that information, or there wasn't really the resources for the mother to heal. The only real options that we were given were pelvic floor squeezes. And I'm the sort of person that I like a challenge, and if someone tells me it's going to make me better, I do it. And so I did my pelvic floor squeezes religiously and actually made my problems worse. So over a period of time, I just found that the incontinence was really impacting what I was able to do, my confidence. I loved going to the gym. That was suffering. And so I started to look into more holistic alternatives, because it just didn't seem that there was anything else out there other than going to your women's health physio, doing your Kegels, and if they didn't work, going on the list for gynecological surgery, which I certainly didn't want to even consider. So it was probably about 11 years ago now that I started hearing whisperings about hypopressives, and went on a course, gave it a punt, and it's been a miracle for me, really. It's completely changed my business and my life. And I know that sounds really cheesy. Whenever I say it, I think, oh, I hate it when people say those things, but it's very true, in that it's given me something that that's fairly easy to instruct people, whether they're newly postnatal, whether they're menopausal, whether they're in their older age, and they can do, at any age can do it, and it can be adapted, and it's just so much better at getting the body to function as a whole, and in turn bringing the pelvic floor into that, and getting better function and less tension in the whole of the body. So for me, it's about prevention. So I wanted to prevent mine from getting any worse, because I definitely felt like it was. And then really to find a solution. And not everybody finds a total solution with hypopressives, but certainly they might find that they'll have some of their symptoms eradicated. So for me, my symptoms stopped me from getting on with my life, and the incontinence is gone, and I've gone through the menopause. I'm out the other side, and looking at my old age, thinking, well, you know, I've put myself in the best position. So it will be something that I do for life, and it's something, like I say, that has massively changed my life, because again, with my business, I was very much about personal training. I had a lot of female clients. We were doing boot camps in the park with babies, and it was all the wrong type of training. And still I see training in the gym, which is the wrong type of training to be starting a postnatal woman with. So I think still that education side of things needs to change, very much in the fitness world, but I think across the board really, so that women know what the right stages are to rehab after having children, and going on from there, what they can and can't do and how to safely do it, rather than just going to their GP and being told 6 weeks after they've had their baby, or when they've had a cesarean 12 weeks after they've had a baby, you're good to go with exercise. That's basically what they're given, and it just isn't good enough. It's not true in any case that anybody should just go back to exercise after 6 weeks. There should be a proper program put in place. So yeah, I mean, Hypopressives is postural and breathing training, and the breath work works on restoring that symbiotic relationship between the pelvic floor and the diaphragm. It's very mindful, it gets very deep connections working, and it also allows that tension release. So it helps with posture, pain, all sorts of things. Yeah, I could go on forever, so I won't. But yeah, as you can tell, I'm a massive fan.
Yeah, well, I trained, I don't know how many years ago now with you.
Did you come to the course in Reading?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that was probably 2016, was it?
That sounds right. So what I found since I did the training, and then I've been teaching clients, is that depending on where I am in my cycle, I can sometimes feel the exercises in a different way than at other times. So leading up to the period, I think everything feels a bit more visceral, and it's easier to feel the vacuum personally. And I've had clients sort of say similar things, that depending on where they are in their cycle, they can experience it differently. So that's what got me sort of interested in talking to Nikki about this connection between the pelvic floor, the menstrual cycle, what the hormones are doing, and then hypopressives. So I thought I'd just quickly show a little diagram, because we might be talking about different hormones, just to give people a reminder, maybe that you covered this at school and it's been a long time.
Very long time.
Yeah, so I'll just share it briefly, so that we kind of know what we're talking about. So can you see that, Nikki? Okay. Yeah, so it was mainly the top diagram with the different lines on. So the follicular stage, we're going from sort of day 1, which is the period, through to ovulation, which on a sort of archetypal cycle would be day 14. So you can see in the sort of purple dashed line that the estrogen is increasing over that time.
Yeah.
And then we get to ovulation. That's where the luteinizing hormone really peaks to help the egg pop out. And then that decreases, and the estrogen starts decreasing into the luteal phase, where at that stage progesterone is taking over to really build the lining of the womb. And then when there isn't an egg fertilized, then both the estrogen and the progesterone drop right down, and we start again. And now obviously, you know, cycles can vary hugely. It's perfectly normal to be between 21 days and 35 days. 28 is just sort of this archetypal thing that we talk about. So I'll stop sharing. I just wanted to give that kind of, so as we talk about different hormones, we can have a sense of what's happening. So we can talk more about how the hormones change over the cycle, but I wanted to dive in with a question for Nikki, which was, we know that the pelvic floor muscles are strongest in the luteal phase. So that's because the estrogen is higher and the progesterone is increased there. So should we change the way we practice or teach hypopressives depending on where somebody is in the cycle, because the muscles are sometimes weaker and stronger?
I think it's very personal as to what symptoms people are getting. Personally, I think that I wouldn't necessarily change the way I train someone unless they said to me, and I can put myself in this category, there were times through my cycle when I just didn't feel like it. And that would be because I felt everything was really heavy, very sore, very bloated. And as we know with hypopressives, when we create that vacuum, we're getting rid of the space that's there, and any inflammation needs some space. So if you're very bloated, you have a few very heavy days, then I would usually advise people to just listen to their body and go with what they feel like, really. In terms of strength and weakness with the pelvic floor, I work more on the premise that the pelvic floor just has to function. So it has to be able to oscillate and move with you throughout your day. So if it's going through a stronger phase, then it won't matter, particularly with something like hypopressives. It might matter a little bit more with other types of training, but not so much with hypopressives, because we're still just trying to work on the function. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very much down to the person and their symptoms. And my period very much changed through my life towards the perimenopause, or in the perimenopause. I was having some really awful days where I just didn't want to leave the house. There was no way I felt like doing hypopressives at all. I didn't really even feel like getting up off the sofa. So, I think that's more to do with when you would and wouldn't recommend doing it. Sometimes you find, if someone's got a lot of pain or cramping, that just doing the lateral breath without the postures, somewhere nice and cozy and warm, will help. And that's more from a mindful point of view. It will help with the pain, it will help with discomfort, just by getting them doing the really good lateral breathing and maybe not the breath holds. And again, if someone is religious with their practice, wants to do it every day, on the days where there is inflammation and it's uncomfortable, just leave out the vacuums, leave out the breath holds, because we know that there's still some major benefits going on with the postures and the lateral breath.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I was reading a study recently where they'd asked women about exercising during their periods, and 80-something%, I think it was 81% of the women said that it actually helped their period symptoms. So I think sometimes people think, oh, well, maybe I'll take some painkillers or something and cozy up, but actually the exercise might help through releasing endorphins, like you said, the mindfulness as well. So
I was just going to say the same. It's a bit, there's that connection with depression as well, isn't there? When someone's mood is low, we know that exercise would really help them, but the trouble is it's kind of getting someone when their mood is low to actually exercise. They know it's good, and the more they think about it and the more they're not doing it, it actually makes it worse. So it's finding something, so maybe a part of hypopressives that is still going to make them feel like they've done their practice. They won't feel like they failed and they're still keeping on the program, kind of thing, but it's actually going to be helpful to them.
Yeah. So we know that with period pain and cramping, that it can be worsened by overactive or tight pelvic floor muscles. And I wondered whether you think hypopressives could help in that kind of situation.
So in my experience, hypertonic is what we're talking about. Yeah, hypertonic areas. There's quite a strong correlation with scars in that area. So birth scars. So I would say that sometimes with hypertonic pelvic floor, there's other work to be done as well as hypopressive, so balancing everything out. So if someone knows they do have areas of their pelvic floor that are hypertonic, then they would need to have some scar release work done, or have some more maybe some laser work done on their scar, just to help release the areas of tension. In relation to doing hypopressive, sometimes people with hypertonic pelvic floor can just do hypopressives on their own, and that seems to help them and sort it out. but I know myself, I had hypertonic pelvic floor, and again, that was from overdoing pelvic floor squeezes, and I did need some pressure point release work done, internal work done, and occasionally I'll do a little bit of an internal massage myself, just if I feel like things are getting a bit stuck again, because once you've got a scar, it's never the same. That tissue is never the same, and it can cause, the scar tissue can cause lots of pulls in that area and all over the body, because as we know, we're not just the pelvic floor, everything's connected. So once you've got that scar in that area, it is an area you need to work on, and that's the same with C-section scars as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, hypopressives on its own can really help with hypertonic, strong areas of the pelvic floor, but also you may need to consider having someone else to help you, like I did.
And I've seen that Vlad says in the chat, treating and addressing the tone of the psoas through a manual release tends to positively affect period pain and cramping. And what I often recommend in my classes also is that people can massage into the round ligament. Sometimes that can be causing the cramping, and there are certain poses like child's pose. You can put your fists sort of near where your ovaries are and sort of work them in, and that can really support it. So there are lots of things that
again, it's those pulls, it's those tensions in over tight muscles. So we're talking about the pelvic floor, but it could be somewhere that you don't think is particularly related, but because we're connected through this myofascial web, you may find that a scar somewhere else or some tension somewhere else is causing that pull and making your cramps worse. So yeah. Right.
So I think that there's more coming out. We mentioned before about training in the gym. There's more coming out around working with the menstrual cycle when you're training, about how to sort of adjust hormones, how hormones are impacting on strength, resilience. So for example, they talk about as the estrogen increases through the first stage, the follicular stage, there might be more energy, and it's a good time to focus on cardio, building strength. Like peak time to work on strength is at ovulation. But then in the luteal phase, you might shift that. You can't absorb nutrients in the same way. You might need to change your diet if you were really working on training towards something in particular. And so suggestions around maybe more restorative practices during the menstruation phase, maybe like restorative yoga or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, I wondered, do you think there's an awareness where you go to the gym of how the menstrual cycle can affect training?
Not at all, no. I mean, I try and talk to people about hypopressives. It's funny because yesterday I was having a conversation with the girl that takes, I do a boxing class on a Tuesday. She's amazing, looks really fit, I think she might even do some bodybuilding. It's wonderful, but she's inherently got a bad back. And I've noticed a cycle where she's like, oh, I can't do that. I'll show you it, but I'm adapting it because of my back. And then it'll be fine again. I see her training and then she comes back in and she can't even make that connection that bad back isn't because her back's necessarily weak. It's just because she's got some dysfunction going in there. She needs to kind of almost go back, readdress that. So I really can say 100% that none of the trainers, although it's a really good gym, so I don't work out of a gym. I just tend to work from home now. I don't actually kind of run any classes or sessions from a gym, but certainly the gym I go to, there just isn't an awareness in the fitness world at all with, I won't say at all, that's not fair. I think there tends to be women like yourself, personal trainers that have maybe had issues like me, that have gone more into women's health. So they might be working from a gym, and that gym would then be much more on board with that side of it. But if there isn't someone in there that's actually had the issues and doing other things with people, then I really don't think it's out there at all. Certainly the guys, that there's quite a lot of male personal trainers in the gym, they wouldn't be thinking about that when they're training. They wouldn't be thinking about the woman's cycle and how that might affect them when they're training them. They're not thinking about their pelvic floor either, because I've seen some of the exercises they give people.
And maybe we can talk about this a bit later, but it's really important to know whether somebody's on hormonal contraception or not, because if it's a combined pill, which is going to actually completely change the cycle, you can train in a different way. Whereas if somebody's having a natural cycle, then there will be these changes through the month. But I think if people want a starting point with it, I'd really recommend Stacey Sims' book called Raw.
Okay.
ROAR. Stacey Sims,
Yeah.
her book Raw, and she talks a lot about women are not little men.
Yeah.
And she goes into great depth about all of this.
Anybody looking for a trainer really needs to do their homework, and I think that's the thing, is that a lot of people that come in and want a trainer, they don't do their homework. They just kind of think, oh well, who's at my gym? She smiled at me, I like the look of her, she'll know what she's talking about. And unfortunately, when I know from doing the qualification, and I know I did my qualification 10-11 years ago, but or maybe longer than that now, but even now coming through, the personal training qualification just doesn't really cover anything much in depth. It's a bit like your GP. It's general, everything's general. We know a little bit about a few things, and then over time, when you so for example, I went more into women's health. I've done a lot more courses and a lot more training around that, whereas I think that, you know, those general personal trainers that are in the gym just don't tend to bother. Even they just think they know enough. Like you say, we're not little men.
So following on from that, I wanted to ask about hypopressives helping, where women feel a heaviness in their pelvic floor or leaking, which I know, you know, you describe already some of your journey, but it might be that it's actually happening in just part of their cycle, that heaviness, so they might not immediately pick up that there's an issue. I think it's so interesting what you observed, that lady that you were watching and with her back. That was, you know, some really amazing observation there.
Yeah, but I think that's just because I'm very kind of in tune with that side of things. Like, I'll go into the gym, and although I'm trying to be blinkered and do my own training and ignore what everyone else is doing, I am watching what other trainers are doing with people, and it's difficult, like, not to think, oh no, I wouldn't be doing that with her, and I wouldn't be doing that with her. You know, it's just human nature. It's again, it's not their fault. Well, but it kind of is, because they should have better education. If they're going to work with that population, they should know about them.
And I said to my own trainer, you know, it only makes sense to me that we do the fitness tests on a program when I'm at the same point of my cycle, because otherwise we're not actually comparing like with like.
No, absolutely. I mean, in terms of leaking, I mean, not at the gym now, but when I've been at other gyms, there's been these awful rebound type classes, which are like little trampoline classes, and they'll have a basket of pads at the front of the thing, and people go and grab a pad and pop that in before they start their trampolining class, and it's like it's just madness. I just don't understand the fitness industry. I wish that I could change their mind, and I think that we, as a whole, the more awareness we bring to this is kind of what all these things are about, is kind of changing people's minds, and, you know, and not going, oh well, I leak, that's normal. I leak, what are you gonna, can you help me with that, my personal trainer? Oh no, you can't, so I'll find someone that can, you know, or I'll find somebody, you know, an array of people that can help me with that. And just it kind of accepting that that's one of the things that kind of happens.
Yeah, because what struck me when you said about the basket with the pads in is that's normalizing them leaking.
Yeah.
And what I always say to people in my postnatal classes is, you know, it might be very common to have these issues, but it's not normal, and let's try and get you back to a point of functioning really well.
But I also think with postnatal is that there's this expectation to kind of get your body back, and expectation to be able to go back to doing exactly what you were doing before, without that kind of real recovery phase. No one kind of talks about how long it takes to rehab or recover. Sorry, it's typical, someone's come to the door. Hopefully my son will get it. But you know, it takes 3 to 5 years for your body to recover after one baby. And then, but who leaves 3 to 5 years between having children? Usually women are having children after 2 to 3 years. And so what that means is that they don't fully recover from having the first baby, and then they have another one, and then, you know, they might go on to have more in a really short space of time without that natural recovery process. And then you put into the factor that someone might have a tear and episiotomy, trauma from the birth, you know, the C-section, all of that changes things completely. And just the pregnancy itself puts a lot of pressure and makes a lot of changes to the body physically. So you know, I think that there's that, you know, that whole media driven, you need to look a certain way, you need to get back and do these certain things, you need to be super mum. And I don't think women really allow themselves enough time to kind of get everything rehabbed as it should be. And then there isn't the rehab program in place. I think if we put the rehab program in place and said, look, you shouldn't be returning to the gym after 6 weeks, although you can do these types of exercise that will build you up to that. We're not saying you can't do it, it's just that you've taken a big jump forward and there's all these little steps that you need to have taken beforehand. So
Sam said in the chat, don't get me started on the glamorous tenor pads adverts. At least now we're beginning to see with adverts for period products that they use red instead of like a blue liquid. So we're kind of moving slowly in the right direction. But yeah, I think something else, you know, again, if in a training point of view, is sort of checking in with somebody postnatally. Have you yet got your period back? Because it varies so hugely. Some people might get it the very next month after birth. Others, it will be years if they're long-term breastfeeding. Yeah. Are they breastfeeding? So in my postnatal registration form, I ask, are you currently breastfeeding? Because you know, that will affect the hormones.
Yeah, it makes a massive difference to training. And again, don't get me started. Like I say, it's I see, you know, women in gyms that I know are breastfeeding, and the exercises that they're doing by themselves because they think they've been told by the GP you're good to train, and they're not told how everything's affecting their ligaments, how much weaker they're going to feel. So yeah, it's a minefield. It really is.
So another question I had for you is there a way of working with the breath and the pelvic floor outside of the hypopressives? Because I was thinking about in the gym, that if we're thinking about that really low time of estrogen in the cycle, say somebody's in the gym lifting free weights and they want to use the principles of hypopressives, but they're not actually doing the sequence at that point. Are there sort of principles we can draw out of it?
I would say personally that's not something I would do, because it's a bit like when we do our hypopressive session, we're doing that to restore function, release tension for the rest of the day. And over time, we change those neuromuscular pathways so that our posture is better, our muscles work in a different way. We've got that more of a subconscious contraction. So in an ideal world, you know, if someone's regularly doing hypopressives, it will mean over a period of time, they'll just, whichever stage they're in at their cycle, they should be able to train efficiently without having to do that breath other than within their hypopressive session. Just the same as, say, for example, yoga, you're increasing that flexibility. So that can be really helpful with some gym moves, but you don't give them yoga breathing to do whilst they're training, because yoga is in that session that you're trying to adapt and make that change. And you'd hope they do regular yoga sessions so that that becomes part of their life. And then when they do their gym training, it means they're much more efficient, they've got better endurance. All of the benefits of hypopressives will happen throughout their training. So their pelvic floor will be more functional, they'll have more strength, they'll have less feeling of heaviness, etc., etc. But you won't actually have to do any breathing within it. I mean, one of the confusions that comes with weightlifting and hypopressives is that people say, oh, well, you know, I've seen like bodybuilders doing that vacuum. And yes, they do, but they've trained themselves consciously to do that vacuum. They're actually sucking their tummy in. They're actually pulling everything in. So they're consciously contracting their muscles and tensing. They're not doing hypopressives, because hypopressives is a subconscious reflex. Muscles are relatively relaxed so that we can get that lift. So yeah, I would say that, I mean, I've tried with things like doing a handstand, so if I'm doing a handstand, if I get a vacuum on the floor, I can do a handstand and keep the vacuum. But if you imagine kind of lifting heavy weights, you need to be using your breath differently. Not the hypopressives will make your breathing more efficient, but you need to be using your breath differently when you're lifting heavy weights to you do in hypopressives. You need some conscious contraction, you need that cylindrical contraction, as well as some of that subconscious help from what you will have improved with hypopressives. So
yeah, that's really clear, thank you. Going back for a moment to the sort of period pain and cramping, you know, I was imagining that all the lateral breathing from the hypopressives, creating the vacuum, everything about the hypopressives would really help have a positive effect if somebody had period pain.
Yep.
I'm quite fortunate because I haven't suffered from it, but I could see it's got all the sort of ingredients to help it as a knock-on effect. So I don't know whether you'd had any clients that had spoken to you about that.
No, I haven't really had anybody that has said that it's improved that. You know, many other different things around pain, but mostly kind of postural stuff. But maybe, see, the thing is with hypopressives is people come to hypopressives with a specific problem, and then they have loads of different changes, and like they might say to you months down the line, oh yeah, I've stopped getting migraines. You're like, you didn't tell me you were getting migraines. And they're like, oh yeah, I used to get really bad migraines, and I don't get migraines anymore. It's like, you know, but so I think that when I see people, they're very much focused in on prolapse or incontinence or some sort of pelvic floor dysfunction, diastases, or, you know, and not really the postural stuff, the you know, all of that other stuff, the pain maybe from cramps for their period, that might have changed, but it's not something that they really are focusing in on, because they're focused in on kind of repairing what's going on. I'm a bit like you. I never really suffered from really bad cramps or pain, even on my heaviest days. It was just a feeling of I don't know, it was like I was carrying a balloon around. It was just really a bit uncomfortable. I suppose it's the uncomfortable is more what it was. I knew I was on a bad day because I was uncomfortable, not particularly painful or crampy. So it would be interesting if anybody else here as that does hypopressives has noticed a change in that, or maybe it's something I need to bring into my questionnaire. I don't know, Sam, if you're there. I know you're muted, but I don't know whether you've had anybody. So if you have, maybe you can put in the chat, or if anybody that's here notices that their period pain is less, if they had really bad cramps, if they notice it's less, then just let us know, because it'd be interesting to know.
Maybe we can do a poll in the Facebook group.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
Yeah. So sort of following on from that, I was thinking about very common conditions like endometriosis, fibroids, that often take so long to get a diagnosis. I think the average is 7 years to get a diagnosis of endometriosis. And I haven't got the figures in front of me, but you know, they're quite common actually, and I think they're even more prevalent than we have stats for, because a lot of people are told by their GP it's just something you have to put up with. It's sort of women's issues, and they don't realise the extent of the pain that somebody's actually experiencing. So I'm sort of guessing the answer now that you've talked a bit already, but do you think changes should be made to the hypopressive sequence if somebody has a condition like that?
A bit like when we talk about contraindications, we always kind of ask if there's any irritable bowel, any Crohn's, any kind of bowel or anything, conditions that people might have that cause that inflammation. And so when they're in a flare-up, it's going to be a no-no for doing the vacuum, and possibly a no-no for doing the lateral breathing. Just depends how it feels. So, you know, although it's very beneficial for any of those conditions, is very beneficial for getting everything moving and releasing, and it's a very gentle way of doing it. I would say that when there's that real flare up, when there's, you know, they're in a bad flare up, that it would be a no-no. definitely.
So you might stick with the lateral breathing but not do the vacuum.
Again, sometimes the lateral breathing can just cause them to feel like really uncomfortable. Just depends on the level. So it would depend on someone's pain. It would depend on how much inflamed they are, where the areas are. If it's kind of quite high up, it's going to be more compromised. So yeah, I would just, it would again be person dependent, but with anything that causes inflammation in that area, you just got to be really careful if they're in flare up. Then just lateral breathing, some of the postures where it feels more comfortable, doesn't have to be the whole flow, just adapt it to suit the person really. There's some great floor postures, so anyone that knows the basic flow, there's only one floor posture, but in the level 2 there's some great progressions that which can give you a whole phase where you're just on the floor if you want to. So again, it would just be a case of learning those and practicing those probably if they're more comfortable.
I could even imagine doing that maybe with a hot water bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. And you mentioned before about the menopause. And so with the decline of estrogen through the perimenopause into menopause, you know, that's part of the reason I trained to do the hypopressives for women who come to my women's circle, and they were finding as they come into the menopause, there was a change in their pelvic floor. Can you tell us a bit about whether you've seen benefits from the hypopressives for your clients, or, I mean, obviously all the way through your journey, you've been doing it. So
yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, that's what's great about it is that, you know, I suffered badly with incontinence. I suffered badly with low back pain. I suffered badly with kind of just general postural pain. And I used to wake up every day with pain, and I just don't have that anymore. And so just to be able to give someone that, I know we're not talking about pelvic floor function so much, but we are in a way because it's all so connected. So from that side of it, you know, you prevent that decline of the posture where everyone kind of hunches forward and ends up kind of with their head disappearing into their shoulders. My mum's like that. My mum's got like a really awful bent over posture. She's in her late 70s now. So I'm looking to prevent that from ever happening with myself and with other clients as well. But in terms of pelvic floor function, I mean, I had incontinence issues for a very long time, and they just haven't returned even through all the changes of the menopause. And I still weight train, I still walk regularly, I still do lots and lots of exercise. I'm doing probably more than I did postnatally because I've got more time now, and you know, I don't have to worry about running around after the kids, etc. So I do have the time to give to hypopressives. I do practice it regularly, but it has and it will make massive changes to a menopausal woman in that it will prevent things from getting any worse. Who doesn't want that? You know, I mean, you know, if you started to get symptoms that you didn't have before because you're going through the menopause, let's just stop them there. Let's stop those symptoms. And even if you still had a few symptoms, but they never got any worse, then that's got to be a major win. That the thing being is that a lot of people don't come to us until they're in a state. They've been living with stuff for a long time. They think it's age related. They put it down to the menopause. But what you don't realize is the more you leave it, the gradually over time, the worse it's getting. So we need to stop it in its tracks. And then hopefully over time, we'd start to get some symptom relief. So because of that function of the pelvic floor, even though we're losing some of those hormones and the levels are decreasing, we're still able to kind of have better function and still be able to, I mean, I've got people in my group that are in their 70s that are sending me messages, or I went and did a really like hilly walk and I'm, you know, absolutely fine, didn't have to wear the pads. Another lady I was talking to on my Zoom class today is 71, and she said, you know, she definitely not rushing to the loo as often as she was. So it's about kind of making symptoms less and hopefully kind of getting rid of them is the best case scenario, obviously, but that thing of prevention where we stop it in its tracks and say that's enough now, let's work on this, don't let this get any worse. And that's posture, that's pelvic floor issues, that's everything. So I think the thing being is that we kind of get these messages about old age, the menopause, you know, and you kind of, a lot of women, I was saying this to the woman this morning, they feel like it's their lot. It's like, oh yeah, well, it's just part of, I'm this age, and so that's bound to happen. No, it isn't. We can do something about this. We can kind of make life a little bit better.
And I think, yeah, a big part is awareness, because maybe increasingly people are thinking about it postnatally. There's been so much in the media recently about menopause, but I was just, while you were talking, it came to my mind, it's also thinking about, say, if somebody is on hormones, like it might be they're on hormonal contraception, or maybe they've been on HRT and then they come off, that being aware that removal of the artificial hormones might then mean that there's a change in the pelvic floor, and just realizing then that that's not something you have to put up with, but you know, it might be that that's been masking what's actually happening with the function, and there's things that you can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom, does it?
No. Well, that's one thing I wanted to share. You know, maybe people aren't really familiar with cycle awareness, and the number one thing you can start to do is charting, is tracking your cycle. And there are lots of apps now. I mean, most people I know, if they use an app like Clue, that can be a really easy way to log it. You know, you've got your phone with you all the time. I'm still on a paper chart. I find that's easiest for me to then look back over the months and begin to see patterns. But for example, you know, it was only when I started charting my cycle that I began to see that I had a regular pattern where, because I tend to be all out sort of superwoman mode around ovulation, and if I've been doing too much and not pacing myself, I'll get to day 21 and it will be like I've dropped off a cliff, and I was like, oh, why did I say yes to so many things? Why did I take that and that? Why didn't I say no to that person? And it's really having that cycle awareness has helped me sort of manage my energy, the sort of patterns of behavior, because everybody's different. That's what you start learning when you run workshops around cycle awareness is, you know, I might assume that everybody likes the sort of ovulation stage because I really like it, but somebody else will find that's not the time that they enjoy. So I think
there's also talking about the menopause, there's also a really good app. Is it the Balance app?
Yeah, I just found out about that one.
That's actually really a good one for tracking menopause symptoms and just kind of seeing where you are with things. I started using it quite regularly, and then I've kind of dropped off with that because it's just typical. Things kind of improved with myself. I was going through a period where I had like really bad symptoms, so I was tracking them all the time to kind of see what was going on. I was doing daily tracking, and then now they're not there. I can't be bothered with it. That's just my mindset. But that's actually a really good one of kind of picking up on things that you think, oh, I didn't realize that was related to this and the menopause and what I'm going through. It wasn't related to that. And the list of symptoms is extensive, so there's loads of different things in there that people might be going through that they don't realize is part of the menopause.
Like dry eyes, problem with your gums, estrogen receptors are all the way through the body. So
absolutely. So yeah, that's another good app for kind of tracking when you're going through the menopause, or if you think you might be perimenopausal, you can kind of look and see what your symptoms are. Yeah.
I thought, because we mentioned about heavy periods before, and one thing that I found a lot through the workshops and circles that I do is that what you use for your periods can have a massive impact. Really? So in terms of period products, and I've had so many women who were having a really heavy flow, and that might be as they've gone towards the menopause and they've become irregular and heavier, that instead of using say a disposable pad, maybe one of the cheaper brands that has probably got quite a lot of chemicals and plastic in, by switching to an organic one has really had a massive impact. Even more so, I think, with things like tampons, because that's going inside and your body could absorb the chemicals. Yeah. So I think that's something worth considering, which, you know, if you're a personal trainer or you're teaching hypopressives and somebody's struggling with heavy bleeding, could just signpost that option to them to explore.
What experience have you got with like the moon cups? Because that was a revelation for me when I was heading like into the worst part of my periods, coming to the menopause, and I was getting like, I'd get like a couple of months where I wouldn't have a period, and then suddenly I'd have like 2 or 3 days where like I felt like I couldn't leave the house. And then I bought like one of these, they're not just, that Moon Cup is
That's, yeah, brand period cup. Yeah.
Like cups anyway.
Menstrual cup.
Cups, yeah, menstrual cup. That's it. I went through a website that actually helped me find the size that I needed, and it was really helpful, and it was an absolute revelation. I felt a bit stupid, because it was like, I've got to this age and I've never known about this. Why haven't I used this before? And it was ridiculous. I was then going around telling all my girlfriends, have you got a daughter? You need to get them using these instead of these awful tampons that I've used all this time. It was just an absolute revelation. I can't describe how having that in made me feel so much more secure. Even if it was a really, really heavy day, it would just be so easy to use. I mean, you have to obviously be okay with your bodily fluids, because you have to empty it and put it back in again, but it was just amazing. So I just felt that why hadn't I ever known about this before, kind of thing.
Yeah, and there are also videos on YouTube of how you fold the cup to make it easier. There's lots of different techniques. I'd say from my women's circle that about half of the women who've tried to use one have absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
And the other half haven't been able to make it feel comfortable. And I think it's about getting it sort of high enough up over the pelvic bones. And also, I think there's something there when I've been talking to them about the delivery that they had with their baby. Okay. And sometimes if there was scar tissue, again, that could make things a little bit more awkward. But that goes back to what you were saying about support, working with the scar tissue. Yeah. But yeah, I love my menstrual cup.
Yeah, no,
game changer.
I didn't get enough time using it, if you know what I mean. Or not that I want to go back to having a period again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of wish I'd known about it before. So.
And I find that people often use a combination, so they might use a cup and a pad, whatever sort of makes you feel comfortable. And at different times of menstruation, you might use different things. So I think maybe we just finish. I had one more question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which was, there's been a strong message coming through, certainly where I hear about things, about taking time to rest during your period. And that trying to combat that idea that we should just be on the go 24/7, always giving out to everybody, which I think is healthy. But I wondered what you thought in relation to, maybe training, and whether you had any thoughts.
I just think that we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do everything. So, you're running around, taking kids everywhere, doing shopping, being super mum, as well as running a business or going to work. And then you feel like you've let yourself go. So you have to eat well, go to the gym, go for a run, blah, blah, blah. And I think sometimes it just becomes all too much. And it is about that being a bit more intuitive with your training. And it's the same with hypopressives, is that yes, I might say to you when you come to my groups, yes, I want you to do something every day, but actually do have permission to have some time off. If you don't feel like doing hypopressives and you fancied going and doing something else, or just life got in the way and you couldn't fit it in, then it really doesn't matter. If you miss a few days, it's not really going to affect it that greatly, as long as it is part of your lifestyle and you've made it part of kind of your own well-being package. I think that that's where you have to be with any of it. Having said that, I'm very guilty of training to a point where I break myself, and I think that anyone with kind of the same mentality as me can kind of identify with that. And I have had, as I've got older, I've had to find things that I actually don't want to go and get too hot and sweaty in the gym now. I'd rather train more efficiently. I'm probably the leanest and I've got the best muscle mass that I've ever had at my age. I'm in my 50s, and yet my training doesn't look like I go and kill myself in the gym all the time, or I go and do long runs, or I just add in things that that I like doing. Like I love going for long walks with my dog and going playing with him and running around with him. So I want to be able to do that. And I do like going to the gym. I like doing boxing. So it's thinking about what you like that brings you happiness, and then that will kind of, rather than just thinking, oh, I've got to go and do this arduous 45-minute boot camp where I sweat like mad and I don't enjoy it, but I come out, but yeah, hell, I've got the burn sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just a case of listening to your body and what you need, and giving yourself permission on days when you really just want to lay on the sofa and chill out, or want to just go and sit and listen to the rain, and go and sit and listen to the rain. I know it sounds a bit woo, but it does so much more for you than trying to go and kill yourself in the gym.
Yeah, and I totally echo that from the cycle awareness side, because I sometimes find in my training that it's in the premenstruum that I have a little less power than I normally have. And knowing that and where I am in my cycle, I'm kind to myself, and I don't think, oh, that wasn't such a great session. I can see the reason behind it because I know my own pattern. So again, I just really encourage people to chart, and it might just be simple. It might just be a few words. How did you feel? So you get a sense of how it's changing over the month. So thank you so much, Nikki.
That's okay. I think we had so there's a question here from Lisa that just says, do you know if someone with mild uterine prolapse might be able to use the moon cups? I would say yes, that you would be able to, but again, it's like Tessa said, that sometimes the fit is finding the right one. So you can't, I was just really fortunate with myself that I kind of went, I can't even remember what the website was, but it kind of gave you this questionnaire about various different things. I can't even remember what the questions were. That would be the menopause. Taken away my brain cells. But it was really useful because it kind of went through these steps and then was like, these are the options. So I think it's probably about the fit. Would you tend to agree?
Yeah, I definitely think so.
And also, if you're a little bit unsure and you're seeing a women's health physio, then she might be able to point you in the right direction with it. But when you think that for prolapses, that women's health physios can prescribe you a pessary to help support it. So again, that's putting something up inside you, and pessaries go up a lot further. So I would say that you're absolutely fine. There was something I was reading when I had mine about, making prolapses worse, because but I think if you follow how you're supposed to put them in and how you're supposed to take them out, as long as you're not kind of pulling them and sucking
or bearing down too much to get them.
You actually have to kind of twist them to get them out properly.
I did once read that pre sort of pessaries and those sorts of things, women used to use potatoes to help keep their prolapses.
Oh my word.
Can you imagine? I don't want to leave you with that image. People use what they have to hand.
Sam just says, I love that you have this emphasis on the menstrual cycle with your work. Women's issues are too often ignored, Tessa. Good you have incorporated menopause too. Thank you both for an informative session. Thank you, Sam, for joining us. Well, I think with that lovely comment, do you want to tell people how they can get in touch with you, and if there's any groups or anything that they can get involved with? So anything you've got to kind of share with us? Yeah,
so they can find me at cyclicalwisdom.com. Or on Instagram, tessa.venuti.sanderson. So I post lots of sort of interesting things that I come across, like potatoes, on my Instagram. And in June, I've got a cycle awareness course coming up, which is about how to chart, but it's also very much practices that can support you, whether it's meditation, relaxation, physical things as well. So yeah, do get in touch if you've got questions that weren't answered during the talk. I'd love to hear from you. Right, so I think I have to switch